For 43 years, I poured every ounce of love, every dollar I could spare, and every moment of my golden years into my family. I raised my son Marcus with unwavering devotion after his father passed when he was just 12. I sacrificed my social life, my hobbies, even my health to ensure he had everything he needed. When he married Stephanie and blessed me with 3 beautiful grandchildren, I thought my investment in love had finally paid dividends. I spoiled those children rotten, funded their private school education, and even helped Marcus and Stephanie buy their dream house. But the moment Stephanie looked me up and down in my favorite floral dress and declared that I dressed like a grandmother in front of the entire family at my grandson's graduation party, something inside me shattered. Forever, what she didn't know was that this grandmother had been quietly building an empire worth $12 million, and I was about to teach them all that respect isn't just earned through designer clothes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started so beautifully. I woke up in my cozy ranch house on Maple Street, the same home where I'd raised Marcus through his teenage years, and where countless family memories had been made. Sunlight streamed through my kitchen windows as I carefully selected my outfit for Tommy's high school graduation ceremony. At 71, I still took pride in my appearance, though my style had certainly evolved over the decades. I chose a lovely navy blue dress with tiny white flowers, paired with my pearl necklace and the comfortable low heels that wouldn't leave my feet aching after hours of celebration. Marcus had called me the night before, his voice warm with excitement as he described the party Stephanie was planning for Tommy after the ceremony. My heart swelled with pride thinking about my eldest grandchild walking across that stage, diploma in hand, ready to start his journey at Northwestern University in the fall. I had quietly contributed $25,000 toward his tuition, money I'd saved from my modest pension and the small investments I'd been making for years. Neither Tommy nor his parents knew about my contribution. I preferred to help, from the shadows, the way grandmothers should. My son Marcus worked as a regional sales manager for a medical equipment company, earning a decent living but nothing extravagant. Stephanie had stopped working when their youngest 15-year-old Emma was born, choosing to focus on being a stay-at-home mother. Their middle child, 18-year-old Jake, would be starting college the following year as well. I knew the financial pressure they were under, which is why I'd been quietly helping wherever I could for years. What they didn't realize was that their struggling grandmother had been anything but struggling for quite some time. After my husband Robert died 28 years ago, I'd taken a job as a bookkeeper for a small family-owned construction company. The owner, Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, was a shrewd businesswoman who took me under her wing. She taught me about real estate investments, stock portfolios, and the art of compound interest. When she passed 5 years ago, she left me a substantial portion of her estate, making me a millionaire almost overnight. But I'd kept this windfall to myself, continuing to live modestly while my investments grew. I drove to the graduation ceremony in my reliable Honda Civic, the same car I'd been driving for 8 years. I could have afforded a luxury vehicle, but I saw no need for such displays. At the ceremony, I beamed with pride as Tommy's name was called, and he strode confidently across the stage. His sandy brown hair caught the afternoon light, and his broad smile reminded me so much of Marcus at that age. After the ceremony, we all gathered at Marcus and Stephanie's house for the celebration. Their home was beautiful, a 2-story colonial in one of the better neighborhoods in town. The down payment had come from Stephanie's parents, though I'd quietly helped with some of the closing costs when they came up short. The backyard was decorated with blue and gold balloons, Tommy's school colors, and tables laden with food that Stephanie had spent days preparing. The trouble started when I was standing near the dessert table, chatting with some of the other family members. Stephanie's sister Claire had flown in from California for the graduation, along with her husband and 2 teenage daughters. They were what you might call a fashionable family, always dressed in the latest trends and never shy about discussing their expensive tastes. I was reaching for a piece of cake when I overheard Claire commenting to her daughters about the various guests at the party. Her voice carried that particular tone that some people use when they think they're being quietly observational, but are actually being quite loud and judgmental. "Look at how everyone's dressed," Claire said to her daughters, her voice just loud, enough for several people to hear. "It's so interesting to see the different styles at these family gatherings." Her daughter Madison, who was about 16 and dressed in what I'm sure was a very expensive outfit, giggled softly. "Some people definitely try harder than others," she replied, and I could feel their eyes scanning the crowd. That's when Stephanie approached our little group, carrying a tray of fresh drinks. She was wearing a stunning emerald green dress that probably cost more than I spent on clothing in 6 months, paired with heels that made her tower over everyone. Stephanie had always been beautiful, with her glossy black hair and striking features, but she'd also always been very conscious of appearances. "Oh my goodness, yes," Stephanie said, joining the conversation as she set down the tray. "I was just thinking the same thing. Some people really understand how to dress for special occasions, and others." She trailed off, her eyes moving around the yard before landing directly on me. I was still holding my small plate of cake, wearing my navy dress with the small white flowers. It was a dress I'd purchased from a department store sale rack 2 years earlier, and I thought it was perfectly appropriate for a family graduation party. The fabric was good quality, it fit me well, and the color was flattering. I felt comfortable and presentable. "Others what?" Claire asked, following Stephanie's gaze toward me. Stephanie lowered her voice, but not nearly enough. "Well, take Marcus's mother, for example. Bless her heart, but she dresses exactly like what she is. A grandmother. That floral print, those sensible shoes, that old-fashioned necklace. It's like she's given up on trying to look modern or stylish." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, my fork halfway to my mouth, as the conversation continued around me. Other guests had begun to notice the discussion, and I could feel their eyes turning toward me with a mixture of curiosity and embarrassment. Claire nodded thoughtfully. "I mean, I understand that at a certain age, comfort becomes more important than style, but there's no reason someone can't have both. My mother is 75, and she still looks absolutely fabulous. She shops at the same boutiques I do." "Exactly," Stephanie agreed, her confidence growing as she found support for her observations. "Age doesn't have to mean giving up on fashion. There are so many stylish options for older women these days. But I think some people just accept that they're grandmothers and stop trying." Madison chimed in with the cruelty that only teenagers can manage. "Maybe she just doesn't know how to shop for clothes anymore. Like, maybe she needs someone to take her shopping and show her what looks good." The three of them laughed softly, and that sound will stay with me forever. It wasn't malicious laughter, which somehow made it worse. It was the kind of casual, dismissive amusement that people share when they think they're being clever and observational rather than cruel. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I set my plate down on the nearest table and walked toward the house, hoping to find a quiet moment to collect myself. But as I passed near the kitchen window, I could hear the conversation had continued and grown even more painful. "The thing is," Stephanie was saying to a small group that had gathered around her, "I really think Marcus should say something to her. I mean, she's representing our family at these events. When she shows up looking like she raided a church thrift store, it reflects on all of us." My daughter-in-law's sister laughed. "Oh, that's harsh but fair. I remember at Jake's graduation 2 years ago, she wore that awful beige cardigan with the missing button. I was mortified for you guys." "Right?" Stephanie continued, warming to her theme. "And it's not like she can't afford better clothes. Marcus is always talking about how she's so good with money and how she's saved up all these years. She could easily afford to dress better if she cared enough to try. Jake, my middle grandchild, had apparently joined the conversation. At 18, he was old enough to have opinions, but young enough to be influenced by the adults around him. "Yeah, Grandma Rose does dress kind of old-fashioned," he said. "Some of my friends have seen her at school events and stuff, and they always comment on it." The betrayal I felt hearing those words from my own grandchild was indescribable. This was the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle, the child who used to beg me to read him bedtime stories when he spent weekends at my house. I'd attended every soccer game, every school play, every academic award ceremony. I'd been there for him consistently, lovingly, proudly, and now he was casually throwing me under the bus to fit in with the family's casual cruelty. "Well," Stephanie said with the tone of someone reaching a conclusion, "maybe this will be a wake-up call for her. Sometimes people need to hear the truth before they'll make changes." I realized that they fully intended for me to overhear this conversation. This wasn't accidental gossip. This was a deliberate attempt to shame me into changing my appearance to better suit their image of what a family matriarch should look like. Tommy, the graduate we were supposedly celebrating, had remained quiet during this exchange, but finally spoke up. "Come on, guys. Grandma Rose is just being herself. She doesn't need to change for anybody." For a moment, my heart lifted. Here was my eldest grandchild standing up for me when I needed it most. But Stephanie quickly shut that down. "Tommy, sweetie, you're being very loyal, and that's admirable. But part of growing up is learning that how we present ourselves matters. Your grandmother could benefit from some guidance in that area. Besides," Claire added, "it would be fun to take her shopping. We could make it a whole girls' day out. Get her hair done, pick out some modern clothes, maybe update her makeup. She might actually enjoy it once she sees how much better she looks." The condescension in their voices was overwhelming. They were talking about me like I was a project, a fixer-upper, something that needed to be improved for their comfort and social standing. Marcus appeared in the group at that moment, and I held my breath waiting to see how my son would respond to this discussion about his mother. "What are you all talking about?" he asked, accepting a beer from Stephanie. "We were just discussing your mother's fashion choices," Stephanie said sweetly. "I think it might be time for an intervention." Marcus laughed, and that sound broke something fundamental inside my chest. "Oh, Mom's always dressed like a grandmother. She's been wearing those floral dresses and sensible shoes for as long as I can remember. It's just her style." "But it doesn't have to be," Stephanie pressed. "She could look so much more polished and modern with just a little effort." My son shrugged, as if my appearance was a minor inconvenience he'd simply accepted. "I mean, I guess if it bothers you that much, you could try talking to her about it. But honestly, Steph, she's 71. I don't think she's going to change at this point." The casual dismissal in his voice was devastating. This was the child I'd raised alone after his father died. I'd worked 2 jobs to pay for his college, attended every parent-teacher conference, cheered from the sidelines at every baseball game. I'd given him everything I had, and now he was treating my feelings and dignity as an acceptable sacrifice for his wife's social comfort. "You're probably right," Stephanie agreed, "but it's still embarrassing sometimes. Like when we go to school events or family gatherings, people notice these things." Emma, my youngest grandchild at 15, had been quiet during most of this discussion, but she finally spoke up. "I think Grandma's clothes are kind of cute in a vintage way. Like, retro is popular now." Stephanie's response was swift and condescending. "Oh, honey, there's a difference between intentionally vintage and just old-fashioned. Your grandmother isn't making a fashion statement. She's just not keeping up with the times." That was the moment I decided I'd heard enough. I walked back outside, my face carefully composed, and rejoined the party as if nothing had happened. I hugged Tommy and told him how proud I was of his accomplishment. I made small talk with the relatives and family friends who had gathered to celebrate. I smiled and nodded and played the role of the loving grandmother, all while my heart was breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. But I was also making mental calculations. 43 years of devotion to this family, hundreds of thousands of dollars quietly contributed to their welfare over the years, countless hours of babysitting, cooking, cleaning, and emotional support. And this was how they saw me, as an embarrassment who needed to be fixed, a burden who reflected poorly on their social standing. For the rest of the evening, I watched my family with new eyes. I noticed how Stephanie's friends complimented her dress and asked where she'd bought it. I observed the easy way Claire's daughters interacted with their mother, clearly comfortable with the family's values and priorities. I saw how Marcus deferred to Stephanie's opinions and supported her worldview without question. And I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd become the outsider in my own family. I was tolerated rather than treasured, endured rather than embraced. My love and generosity had been taken for granted for so long that they'd forgotten it wasn't guaranteed. When it was time to leave, I hugged everyone goodbye with the same warmth I'd always shown. Tommy thanked me for coming and said he hoped I'd enjoyed the party. Jake gave me his usual quick hug and promised to call soon. Emma, bless her heart, held on a little longer and whispered that she thought my dress was pretty. Marcus walked me to my car, as he always did. "Thanks for coming, Mom. It meant a lot to Tommy to have you there." "Of course," I replied, my voice steady. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. "Hey," he said, his hand on my car door. "I hope you don't mind if Stephanie mentions something to you about, updating your wardrobe a little. She's really good at that stuff, and she just wants to help." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, and realized he genuinely thought his wife's cruelty was kindness. He actually believed that publicly humiliating me about my appearance was a form of help. "I appreciate the thought," I said carefully, "but I'm quite comfortable with my choices." Marcus nodded, but I could see the slight disappointment in his eyes. He'd hoped I'd be more receptive to their guidance. I drove home slowly, taking the long way through the neighborhoods I'd lived in for decades. Everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but I felt fundamentally changed. The grandmother who had left for that party was gone, replaced by someone harder and more calculating. At home, I changed out of my floral dress and hung it carefully in my closet. Then, I walked to my home office and opened the fireproof safe where I kept my important documents. I pulled out my will and read through it slowly. According to the current terms, my estate would be divided equally among my 3 grandchildren, with smaller bequests for Marcus and Stephanie to ensure they were comfortable. The bulk of my wealth, nearly $12 million accumulated, through careful investing and Mrs. Hartwell's generous bequest, was destined for Tommy, Jake, and Emma. I had always imagined them using that money wisely. College funds, down payments on homes, seed money for businesses, security for their own children someday. I'd pictured Tommy's gratitude when he realized his grandmother had quietly ensured his financial freedom. I'd imagined Jake's surprise and appreciation. I'd envisioned Emma's delight at discovering the safety net I'd provided for her future. But now I wondered if they'd simply see it as their due, the final gift from the embarrassing grandmother who dressed like she'd raided a church thrift store. I spent the next several hours researching estate planning attorneys online. By midnight, I had appointments scheduled with 3 different lawyers for the following week. If my family wanted to treat me like an embarrassment, perhaps it was time they learned what that embarrassment was actually worth. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I made my coffee and sat in my kitchen, looking out at the garden I'd tended for decades. The roses were in full bloom, their beauty a reminder that some things become more magnificent with time and care. I called my financial advisor, Patricia, and scheduled a meeting. Then I called my attorney, though not the family lawyer who had drafted my original will. I needed someone with no connection to Marcus or Stephanie, someone who would help me explore my options without judgment. Over the following days, I began to see my life and my family with an unsentimental eye. I started keeping track of the casual dismissals, the subtle put-downs, the ways my contributions were minimized or ignored entirely. When Jake called to ask if I could help him with his car insurance payment, I said yes, as I always did. But this time, I noticed that the conversation began and ended with his financial need. No inquiry about my health, my activities, or my feelings, just a request for money and a quick goodbye once he'd gotten what he needed. When Emma texted me about needing money for a school trip, I transferred the funds immediately. But I also noticed that she'd asked her parents first and only contacted me when they said they couldn't afford it. I was the backup plan, the emergency fund, the grandmother who could always be counted on to open her wallet. When Stephanie called to ask if I could babysit Emma for the weekend while she and Marcus went to a wedding, I agreed. But I listened carefully to her tone, noting the assumption that I had nothing better to do with my time, that my weekend was automatically available for their convenience. During that weekend with Emma, I learned something interesting. My youngest, grandchild, the one who had complimented my dress at the party, had her own thoughts about the family dynamics. "Grandma Rose," she said while we were baking cookies together, "do you ever get tired of Mom always trying to fix people?" I looked at her carefully. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Emma shrugged, her attention focused on cutting cookie shapes from the dough. "She's always telling people how they could do things better. Like she's always on Dad about his weight, and she's constantly giving Jake advice about his hair and his clothes. She even tells Tommy how to talk to girls. And what do you think about that?" "I think people should get to be themselves," Emma said with the wisdom that sometimes comes from the mouths of teenagers. "I mean, I know she means well, but sometimes it seems like she thinks everyone else is doing everything." Wrong. I realized that Emma, at 15, had a better understanding of her mother's character than the rest of the family seemed to. She recognized the controlling behavior that the others had normalized or accepted as helpful. "Has she ever tried to change things about you?" I asked gently. Emma nodded. "Oh, all the time. My room, my clothes, my friends, my hobbies. She wants me to be more like Madison and her sister, you know? More interested in fashion and social media and all that stuff." "And how does that make you feel?" "Kind of sad, I guess. Like who I am isn't good enough." I stopped rolling cookie dough and gave my granddaughter my full attention. "Emma, you are absolutely perfect exactly as you are. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." She smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I know you think that, Grandma, but sometimes I wonder if you're the only one." That conversation confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. The criticism directed at me wasn't unique. It was part of a larger pattern of behavior in which Stephanie felt entitled to judge and improve everyone around her. The difference was that the others had gradually accepted her authority, while I had finally reached my breaking point. When Marcus and Stephanie returned from their weekend wedding, Stephanie had news to share. "Rose," she said, settling into my living room with the confidence of someone who expected to be welcomed. "I've been thinking about our conversation at Tommy's party." I waited, saying nothing. "I've arranged for us to have a girls' day out next Saturday. Hair, nails, shopping, the whole thing. My treat. I think it'll be fun to give you a complete makeover." The word makeover hung in the air between us. Not an update, not a refresh, but a complete transformation of who I was. "That's very thoughtful," I said carefully, "but I'm quite happy with my appearance." Stephanie's smile didn't waver, but I could see the frustration in her eyes. "Rose, I think you're being a little stubborn about this. I'm offering to help you look your best. Most women would jump at the chance for a professional makeover. And what exactly is wrong with how I look now?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She'd expected compliance, not pushback. "Well," she said, clearly choosing her words carefully. It's not that anything is wrong exactly. It's just that you could look so much more polished, more modern, more put together. I see. And why is that important? Now Stephanie looked genuinely confused, as if I was asking why water was wet or why the sky was blue. Because appearance matters, Rose. How we present ourselves affects how people see us, how they treat us. When you look dated and frumpy, it reflects on the whole family. There it was, the truth, finally spoken aloud. I was an embarrassment that needed to be fixed. I appreciate your concern, I said, standing up to signal that the conversation was over. But I won't be needing a makeover. Stephanie's expression shifted from confusion to irritation. Rose, I'm trying to help you here. I'm offering to spend my own money to make you look better, and you're being incredibly ungrateful. I'm being true to myself, I replied. Something I should have been doing all along. After she left, I called my attorney and moved up our appointment. I was ready to make some changes of my own, and they had nothing to do with my wardrobe. The law office was located in the downtown business district, in one of those elegant old buildings that spoke of tradition and stability. Margaret Thornfield, the estate planning attorney I'd selected, was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that I immediately appreciated. Mrs. Patterson, she said, gesturing for me to sit in a comfortable chair, across from her mahogany desk, I understand you'd like to discuss updating your will. I want to completely rewrite it, I said without preamble. I want to ensure that my wishes are absolutely clear and legally unbreakable. She raised an eyebrow but opened a legal pad without comment. Can you tell me about your current estate plan and what changes you'd like to make? I explained the current will, the intended beneficiaries, and the approximate value of the estate. Her eyebrows rose slightly at the dollar amount, but she maintained her professional composure. Then I told her about the graduation party, about the conversation I'd overheard, about the pattern of disrespect and entitlement that had finally opened my eyes. So you want to disinherit your family entirely? She asked when I'd finished. Not entirely, I said. I want to teach them a lesson about respect and gratitude. I want them to understand that love and financial support are privileges, not rights. Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. Mrs. Patterson, I need to ask you some questions to ensure you're making these decisions for the right reasons and that you fully understand the implications. For the next hour, she questioned me thoroughly about my mental state, my relationship with my family, my understanding of the consequences of my proposed changes. She wanted to be absolutely certain that I wasn't acting out of temporary anger or confusion. By the end of our consultation, she seemed satisfied that I was of sound mind and clear purpose. I'll draft a new will based on your specifications, she said, but I want you to take some time to consider this carefully. Once it's signed, these changes will have real and lasting impact on your family relationships. That's exactly what I'm counting on, I replied. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in weeks. For the first time in decades, I was taking control of my own narrative instead of simply reacting to other people's expectations and demands. That evening, I sat in my garden with a glass of wine and really looked at my life with fresh eyes. My home was beautiful, filled with antiques and artwork I'd collected over the years. My garden was a testament to decades of careful tending. My financial portfolio was the result of smart decisions and patient investing. I wasn't a doddering old grandmother who needed guidance from her fashion-conscious daughter-in-law. I was a successful, independent woman who had built a good life through intelligence, hard work, and careful planning. The floral dress hanging in my closet wasn't a symbol of giving up or letting myself go. It was a choice made by a woman who valued comfort and personal preference over the approval of others. For 43 years, I'd measured my worth by how much I could give to my family, how many of their needs I could meet, how much of myself I could sacrifice for their benefit. But somewhere along the way, my generosity had transformed into an expectation, my love into an entitlement. It was time for that to change. The following Saturday, the day Stephanie had planned for our makeover adventure, I treated myself instead. I drove to the city and spent the day at an art museum, followed by lunch at an elegant restaurant where I ordered exactly what I wanted without worrying about the price. I bought myself a beautiful silk scarf from a boutique, not because I needed one, but because I wanted it. When Stephanie called that evening to ask why I'd stood her up, I told her the truth. I decided to spend the day doing something I enjoyed instead. But we had plans, she said, her voice tight with frustration. I'd already made appointments. You made appointments without asking if I wanted them, I corrected. That's not the same thing as having plans together. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for several seconds. Rose, Stephanie finally said, her tone shifting to what I recognized as her patient explanation voice. I feel like there's been some kind of misunderstanding here. I'm trying to help you and you're acting like I'm attacking you. You are attacking me, I said calmly. You're attacking my choices, my appearance, and my right to be comfortable in my own skin. You're trying to remake me into someone you'd be less embarrassed to be seen with. That's not what this is about, isn't it? Because that's exactly what you said at Tommy's graduation party, that I was an embarrassment to the family, that my appearance reflected poorly on all of you. Another long silence. You heard that conversation, she said finally. I did. And I heard my son agree with you, and I heard my grandchildren join in. Rose, we weren't trying to hurt you. We want you to feel confident and beautiful. I do feel confident and beautiful, I replied. The problem isn't with how I see myself. The problem is with how you see me. The conversation ended awkwardly, with Stephanie promising to talk to Marcus about the situation. I suspected that conversation wouldn't go the way she expected it to. Over the following weeks, I noticed a subtle shift in how my family interacted with me. There was a carefulness that hadn't been there before, as if they were suddenly aware that I might be listening more critically to their words and actions. Marcus called more frequently, his conversations peppered with compliments about my appearance and expressions of appreciation for everything I'd done for the family over the years. It felt performative rather than genuine, like he was trying to undo damage that had already been done. Jake and Tommy both made efforts to spend more time with me, though their attention seemed focused on reassuring me rather than simply enjoying my company. I appreciated the gesture, but I could see the calculation behind it. Emma, however, seemed unchanged. She continued to visit me regularly, to share stories about school and friends, to ask for my opinions and advice. Her affection felt genuine because it was based on who I was rather than what I could provide. 3 weeks after my meeting with Margaret Thornfield, she called to tell me that the new will was ready for my review. I made an appointment for the following day. The document was exactly what I'd requested: clear, detailed, and legally ironclad. As I read through the terms, I felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. Sadness because it represented the end of so many hopes and dreams I'd had for my family. Satisfaction because it finally aligned my resources with my values. Are you certain about these decisions? Margaret asked as I prepared to sign. I thought about Tommy's graduation party, about Stephanie's makeover plans, about Marcus's casual dismissal of my feelings, about Jake's transactional phone calls, about 43 years of being taken for granted. I'm certain, I said, and signed my name with a steady hand. The new will was witnessed, notarized, and filed. Margaret assured me that copies would be stored in multiple secure locations and that my wishes would be carried out exactly as specified. As I left the law office, I felt a profound sense of completion. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to earn love through sacrifice and generosity. Now, finally, I was choosing to value myself as much as I'd always valued others. The rest of My story would unfold in its own time. But for the first time in decades, I was writing it myself. The weeks following my decision brought an unexpected sense of liberation. I found myself moving through my daily routines with a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. My morning coffee tasted better, my garden seemed more vibrant, and even my reflection in the mirror looked different somehow. I was still the same woman in the same floral dresses, but now I wore them as a choice rather than a resignation. It was during one of these peaceful mornings that Stephanie decided to escalate her campaign for my transformation. She arrived unannounced on a Tuesday, armed with shopping bags and what she clearly considered irresistible enthusiasm. "Rose, I hope you don't mind me dropping by," she said, though she was already pushing past me into my living room. "I brought you some things I thought you might like." The bags were from expensive boutiques downtown, places where a single blouse might cost more than I typically spent on clothing in 3 months. Stephanie began pulling out items with the flourish of a magician performing tricks. Sleek black pants, structured blazers, silk blouses in jewel tones, and accessories that sparkled under my modest living room lighting. "I know you said you weren't interested in updating your wardrobe," she continued, spreading the clothes across my sofa, like an offering. "But I saw these pieces and just knew they would be perfect for you. They're sophisticated but age-appropriate, classic but modern." I stood in my doorway, still holding my coffee cup, watching this performance with growing amazement. The audacity was breathtaking. After I'd explicitly declined her makeover offer, she'd simply decided to bring the makeover to me. "Stephanie," I said carefully, "these are lovely, but I didn't ask for them." I know," she said with a wave of her hand, as if my consent was a minor detail. "But Rose, you haven't even seen how beautiful you could look. Just try one outfit, just one. I guarantee you'll feel like a completely different person." The phrase hung in the air between us. A completely different person. That was exactly what she wanted. For me to become someone else entirely. Someone who would reflect better on her family's image. "What if I don't want to feel like a different person?" I asked. "What if I like who I am?" Stephanie's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Of course you're wonderful as you are," she said, with the practiced insincerity of someone reciting lines. "This is just about presenting the best version of yourself." "According to whose standards?" The question seemed to confuse her. "Well, according to... there are certain standards that everyone follows. Fashion isn't subjective, Rose. There are rules about what works and what doesn't." I set my coffee cup down and moved closer to examine the clothes she'd chosen. They were beautiful, I had to admit. Expensive, well-made, and clearly selected by someone with an eye for style. They were also completely unlike anything I would choose for myself. "These clothes are lovely," I said finally, "but they're not me." "But they could be," Stephanie insisted. "Rose, you're limiting yourself. You're choosing to look frumpy when you could look elegant. You're choosing to be invisible when you could command attention." The word frumpy hit like a slap. There. It was again the casual cruelty disguised as concern. In Stephanie's worldview, my choices were automatically wrong, my preferences automatically inferior. "And what if I prefer to be invisible?" I asked. "What if I don't want to command attention?" Stephanie stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. The concept that someone might genuinely prefer simplicity over spectacle was clearly beyond her comprehension. "Nobody wants to be invisible, Rose. That's just something people tell themselves when they've given up trying." The conversation was interrupted by Emma's arrival. My youngest granddaughter came through the front door, with the casual confidence of someone who'd always been welcome, calling out her usual greeting as she kicked off her shoes. "Hey, Grandma Rose, I brought my history notes like you." "Oh." She stopped short when she saw her mother and the display of expensive clothing covering my furniture. "Emma, perfect timing," Stephanie said, immediately shifting into recruitment mode. Come help me convince your grandmother to try on some of these beautiful clothes. Emma looked at the clothes, then at me, then back at her mother. At 15, she was old enough to recognize the undercurrents in adult conversations, and I could see her processing the situation with careful attention. Why does Grandma need to try on different clothes? She asked. Because she could look so much more polished, Stephanie explained, using the same patient tone she'd used with me. These pieces would be so much more flattering than those old-fashioned dresses she always wears. Emma picked up one of the blazers, examining the fabric and construction with the kind of attention most teenagers reserved for their phones. It's nice, she said diplomatically, but it doesn't really seem like Grandma's style. That's exactly the point, Stephanie said. We're trying to update her style. But why? Emma asked. What's wrong with how she dresses now? The simple question from a 15-year-old cut straight to the heart of the matter in a way that all of Stephanie's elaborate explanations had failed to do. What was wrong with how I dressed? What actual harm was caused by my floral dresses? And comfortable shoes? Stephanie struggled for an answer that wouldn't sound petty when spoken aloud to her own daughter. It's about presenting yourself in the best possible way. About showing respect for yourself and for the people around you. But Grandma does show respect for herself, Emma replied. She always looks clean and neat and put together. Just because her clothes aren't expensive doesn't mean she's not respecting herself. I wanted to hug this child who understood something that the adults in her life had missed entirely. Emma saw the difference between caring about your appearance and conforming to someone else's vision of what you should be. Emma, you're too young to understand these things, Stephanie said, her patience beginning to fray. When you're older, you'll realize how important it is to make the right impression. What kind of impression is Grandma making now? Emma asked. Stephanie opened her mouth, then closed it again. She couldn't very well tell her daughter that her grandmother looked like a frumpy old woman who embarrassed the family, not without revealing the cruelty underlying her entire campaign. She's making a dated impression, Stephanie finally said. She looks like someone who's given up on trying to look nice. Emma turned to me. Grandma, do you feel like you've given up on trying to look nice? I looked at this remarkable young woman who was asking all the right questions, and I realized that Emma was going to be just fine regardless of what happened with the rest of the family. She had something that couldn't be taught or bought, the ability to see through pretense to the truth underneath. No, sweetheart, I said. I feel like I dress in a way that makes me comfortable and happy. That seems like a pretty good way to look nice to me. Emma nodded, as if this made perfect sense. I think so too. Stephanie's frustration was becoming more visible by the moment. Her careful campaign was being undermined by her own daughter's inconvenient questions and my refusal to cooperate with her vision of improvement. Fine, she said, beginning to gather up the clothes with sharp, angry movements. I was trying to do something nice for you, Rose, but clearly you're determined to be stubborn about this. I'm determined to be myself, I corrected. Same thing, apparently, she muttered, shoving a silk blouse back into its bag with enough force to wrinkle the fabric. After Stephanie left, Emma and I sat together on my porch swing, sharing a plate of the oatmeal cookies I'd baked that morning. The expensive clothes were gone, but the tension they'd created lingered in the air like smoke. Mom gets really upset when people don't do what she thinks is best, Emma said, her voice thoughtful. And what do you think about that? Emma was quiet for a long moment, swinging gently back and forth as she considered her answer. I think maybe she means well, but she doesn't always understand that different people want different things. That's a very wise observation. She does the same thing with my room, Emma continued. She wants me to redecorate it to look more mature, but I like my room the way it is. It feels like me, you know? I did know. I knew exactly what she meant, and I was proud of her for recognizing the value of authenticity at such a young age. Emma, I said carefully, do you think it's important for people to be true to themselves, even when other people disagree with their choices? Definitely, she said without hesitation. Otherwise, how would you know who you really are? Over the following days, I began to hear reports of Stephanie's campaign expanding beyond our household. Marcus called to mention that his wife had been asking him to have a talk with me about being more open to suggestions. Jake texted to say that his mother had shown him pictures of really nice clothes that she thought would look good on me. Even Tommy, away at his summer job before starting college, received updates about what Stephanie characterized as my stubborn refusal to accept help with my appearance. The family network was being mobilized to pressure me into compliance. The campaign reached its peak during a dinner at Marcus and Stephanie's house the following Sunday. I'd been invited for what was described as a casual family meal, but it became clear that the entire evening had been orchestrated as an intervention. The table was set with Stephanie's best china, and she'd prepared an elaborate meal that had clearly taken hours to execute. The conversation was carefully steered toward topics that highlighted the importance of appearance and presentation. I saw your Aunt Claire's pictures from that charity gala last week, Stephanie said to no one in particular while passing around vegetables. She looked absolutely stunning. That red dress was perfection. Marcus nodded approvingly. Claire always knows how to dress for an occasion. She understands the importance of making a good impression. It's not just about the clothes, Tommy added, clearly prompted. It's about confidence. When you look good, you feel good. And when you feel good, you project that to everyone around you. I listened to this scripted conversation with growing amusement. They were speaking about me as if I weren't sitting right there, discussing the supposed connection between expensive clothing and self-worth like it was an established scientific fact. What do you think, Grandma Rose? Jake asked. And I could see Stephanie giving him an encouraging nod. Don't you think it might be fun to try some new styles? All eyes turned to me, and I realized this was the moment they'd been building toward all evening. This was my opportunity to graciously accept their guidance and submit to Stephanie's vision of improvement. I think, I said carefully, that confidence comes from being comfortable in your own skin, not from wearing expensive clothes that someone else picked out for you. The silence that followed was deafening. Stephanie's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and Marcus looked like he was trying to figure out how to salvage the conversation. But Mom, Marcus said finally, don't you want to look your best? I do look my best, I replied. I look like myself, which is the best thing anyone can look like. That's not what we mean, Stephanie interjected, her careful politeness beginning to slip. We mean looking polished and put together and expensive, I suggested. And appropriate, she finished firmly. Looking appropriate for your place in this family. There it was. The truth underlying all the talk about confidence and feeling good and making impressions. This wasn't about my well-being. It was about my place in their hierarchy, my role in their social presentation. And what is my place in this family? I asked. Stephanie looked around the table as if expecting support, but found only uncomfortable silence. Marcus was studying his plate with intense concentration, and the children were clearly wishing they could be anywhere else. Your place is... You're Marcus's mother, she said finally. You're the children's grandmother. You're part of our family, and we want you to represent us well. Represent you, I repeated. Like an employee, like someone whose appearance reflects on your brand. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? The dinner deteriorated from there. Stephanie grew increasingly frustrated as I refused to accept her logic, and Marcus became more visibly uncomfortable as he realized his wife was revealing aspects of her character that he'd probably never seen so clearly before. The children finished eating quickly and excused themselves, leaving the adults to continue a conversation that had moved far beyond clothing into much more fundamental territory about respect and family dynamics. "Rose," Stephanie said finally, her voice tight with controlled anger. "I don't understand why you're being so difficult about this. I'm trying to help you, and you're acting like I'm trying to hurt you." "You are trying to hurt me," I said, calmly. "You're trying to hurt the part of me that makes choices you disapprove of. You want to kill off the version of me that exists now and replace her with someone more acceptable to you." "That's ridiculous. I just want you to look nice." "I do look nice. You want me to look expensive." The distinction seemed to escape her entirely. In Stephanie's worldview, the two things were synonymous. Looking nice meant looking expensive, and looking expensive meant conforming to her standards of appropriate presentation. I left that dinner with a clearer understanding of exactly what I was dealing with. This wasn't a misunderstanding that could be resolved through better communication. This was a fundamental difference in values, a collision between someone who believed in authenticity and someone who believed in performance. The following week brought an escalation I hadn't anticipated. Stephanie, apparently frustrated by her inability to convince me through direct confrontation, decided to try public pressure instead. She organized what she called a family shopping day and invited several of her friends to join us. The plan, as she explained it to me over the phone, was for all of us to spend the day at an upscale shopping center, trying on clothes and getting makeovers together. "It'll be so much fun," she said with forced enthusiasm. "You'll love Linda and Patricia. They're both very stylish women who really understand fashion, and Linda's mother is about your age, so she'll have great insights about what works for mature women." The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. She was assembling a panel of judges to validate her opinions about my appearance, creating a situation where I would be outnumbered and presumably pressured into compliance through social embarrassment. "I'm not interested," I told her simply. "Rose, you haven't even heard the whole plan yet. We're going to start with lunch at that lovely new restaurant, then hit the boutiques and finish with spa treatments. Everything's already arranged. Then you'll have to unarrange it, at least as far as I'm concerned. But everyone's expecting you to be there. I've already told them all about you, and they're so excited to meet you and help with your makeover." The phrase made my blood pressure spike. She'd been discussing my appearance with strangers, presenting me as a charity case in need of their expertise and intervention. "Stephanie," I said, my voice harder than it had been at any point in our relationship, "let me be very clear about something. I will not be participating in any group makeover activities. I will not be submitting to the judgment of your friends about my appearance, and I will not be treated like a project that needs to be fixed." "You're being incredibly selfish about this," she snapped, her careful facade finally cracking completely. "This isn't just about you, Rose. This is about all of us. When you look frumpy and outdated, it reflects on Marcus. It reflects on the children. It reflects on me. And that's your problem, not mine. It's everyone's problem when you refuse to make any effort to improve yourself." The conversation ended badly, with Stephanie hanging up in frustration and me sitting in my kitchen, shaking with anger at the sheer presumption of it all. But I wasn't done being surprised by my family's behavior. That evening, Marcus called with what he presented as a reasonable compromise. "Mom, I think maybe we've all been approaching this wrong," he said, in the tone of someone who believed he was being diplomatic. "What if, instead of a big shopping day, Stephanie just picked out a few things for you to try? Nothing dramatic, just some updated pieces that might work with your existing style." "Marcus," I said, "do you understand what you're asking me to do? I'm asking you to be flexible, to consider the possibility that maybe a few small changes might be beneficial. You're asking me to let your wife dress me up like a doll because she's embarrassed to be seen with me as I am. That's not, Mom, that's not fair, isn't it? Because that's exactly what this is about. Stephanie is embarrassed by my appearance, And instead of examining whether her embarrassment is reasonable, you're all trying to change me to accommodate her discomfort. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Mom, is it really so important to wear those old dresses? Is it worth causing all this conflict in the family? The question revealed everything I needed to know about how my son viewed the situation. In his mind, I was the one causing conflict by refusing to submit to his wife's demands. My autonomy, my right to make choices about my own body and appearance, was less important than keeping peace with Stephanie. Marcus, I said slowly, let me ask you something. If Stephanie decided she didn't like your haircut and organized a group of her friends to pressure you into changing it, how would you feel? That's different. How? Because. He struggled for an answer that wouldn't sound hypocritical. Because men's hair is different from women's clothes. No, it's not. It's all about personal choice and bodily autonomy. The only difference is that you're a man. So your right to make choices about your appearance is automatically respected. This conversation, like so many others recently, ended without resolution. But it clarified something important for me. The problem wasn't just Stephanie. The problem was an entire family system that had normalized the idea that my preferences mattered less than everyone else's comfort. Over the next few days, I began receiving calls and texts from Stephanie's friends, women I'd never met who had somehow acquired my phone number and felt entitled to offer their opinions about my situation. Rose, this is Linda, Stephanie's friend, said one voicemail. I just wanted you to know that I think you're missing out on a wonderful opportunity. Fashion can be so empowering for women our age, and I'd love to help you discover some new styles. That would make you feel amazing. Another text message read, Hi Rose, this is Patricia. Stephanie showed me your photo, and I can see so much potential. I know a wonderful personal shopper who specializes in mature women. She could transform your whole look. The audacity was breathtaking. These strangers were contacting me based on photographs Stephanie had shared, offering to fix problems they'd identified in my appearance. They'd been recruited as foot soldiers in Stephanie's campaign, and they were pursuing their mission with the zealous enthusiasm of true believers. I blocked their numbers and changed my voicemail message to screen out unwanted callers, but the incident revealed the extent to which Stephanie was willing to go to impose her will. She'd weaponized her social network against me, turning my appearance into a group project for her entertainment. The situation reached a breaking point the following Saturday morning. I was in my garden, tending to my roses and enjoying the peaceful quiet of early morning when I heard voices coming from my driveway. Looking up, I saw Stephanie's car pull up, followed by two other vehicles I didn't recognize. Stephanie emerged from her car with the determined expression of someone who had decided to take direct action. Behind her came three other women, all perfectly styled and carrying shopping bags, followed by what appeared to be a professional hairstylist with a portable setup. They marched toward my front door like an army of beautification, armed with curling irons and credit cards and the unshakable conviction that they knew what was best for me. I met them at my front gate, still wearing my gardening gloves and holding a pair of pruning shears. "Rose!" Stephanie called out with forced cheerfulness. "Surprise! We're here for your makeover day. I know you said you weren't interested, but we thought if we brought the salon to you, it might be more comfortable." The other women stood behind her like backup singers, smiling with the kind of aggressive friendliness that suggested they'd been thoroughly briefed on their mission. "Good morning, Rose," said a woman with perfectly arranged blonde hair and clothes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "I'm Linda. We're so excited to help you discover your new look." "And I'm Patricia," added another woman. This one brunette with the kind of dramatic makeup that suggested she considered every public appearance a performance. "We've brought everything we need to give you a complete transformation." The stylist, a young man with trendy glasses and an expression of professional enthusiasm, stepped forward with his equipment. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm Derek. Stephanie has told me so much about you, and I can't wait to work with your hair. I have some amazing ideas that will take 20 years off your appearance. I stood there in my garden gate, looking at this assembled team of beauty professionals and well-meaning busybodies, and felt something shift inside me like a tectonic plate finding its new position. No, I said simply. Oh, come on, Rose, Stephanie said, her smile becoming more strained. Don't be shy. We're all here to help you look and feel your best. I said no. But we've already arranged everything, Linda protested. Derek cleared his whole morning schedule for you, and we've brought all these beautiful clothes. I don't care what you've arranged, I said, my voice carrying a firmness that surprised even me. I didn't ask for this. I don't want this. And I'm not participating in this. Patricia stepped forward with the kind of patronizing smile that suggested she was accustomed to dealing with difficult elderly relatives. Rose, honey, I know change can be scary, but sometimes we need other people to help us see our potential. My potential for what? To look like you? To dress like you? To validate your opinions about what women my age should look like? The question seemed to catch them off guard. They'd come prepared for shyness, for insecurity, for gratitude. They hadn't come prepared for direct challenge. We just want to help you feel beautiful, Derek said, his professional enthusiasm beginning to waver. I already feel beautiful, I replied. The problem isn't with how I feel about myself. The problem is with how you feel about me. Stephanie's mask of cheerful persistence finally slipped completely. Rose, this is ridiculous. We've gone to all this trouble to help you, and you're being incredibly ungrateful. Help me with what exactly? What problem are you solving? What crisis are you addressing? You dress like an old woman, she exploded. You look frumpy and outdated and poor. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is to have people ask me why my mother-in-law dresses like she shops at thrift stores? There it was, the truth she'd been dancing around for weeks, finally spoken aloud in all its ugly clarity. I dressed like a poor old woman, and that embarrassed her socially. I see, I said calmly. And people actually ask you that? People actually comment on my clothing when you're out with your friends? Stephanie realized she'd revealed more than she'd intended, but it was too late to take it back. Well, sometimes. People notice these things. What kinds of things do they say? It doesn't matter what they say. The point is that you could look so much better if you just tried. But I'm curious, what exactly do your friends say about my appearance? Stephanie looked around at her assembled team of helpers, clearly wishing she'd never started this conversation. They ask why you don't dress more appropriately for someone in your position. My position? As Marcus's mother, as part of our family, as someone who attends public events with us. I set down my pruning shears and removed my gardening gloves slowly, taking time to consider my response. These people had driven to my home on a Saturday morning, assembled a team of professionals, and planned to ambush me into accepting their vision of who I should be. They discussed my appearance with strangers, criticized my choices behind my back, and now stood in my driveway demanding that I submit to their judgment. Ladies, I said finally, I want you to understand something very clearly. I am a 71-year-old woman who has lived long enough to know who I am and what I want. I dress the way I dress because I like it, because it's comfortable, and because it reflects my personality and values. But Rose, Linda interjected, you could still be comfortable in more stylish clothes. Could I? Or would I be comfortable in clothes that make you more comfortable with me? The distinction seemed to elude her entirely. The fact that my appearance embarrasses you, I continued, says nothing about me and everything about you. The fact that you've organized this intervention says nothing about my need for improvement and everything about your need for control. Derek began packing up his equipment, apparently recognizing that his services would not be required. Patricia and Linda exchanged glances that suggested they were reassessing their volunteer mission. Rose, Stephanie said, her voice tight with frustration. You're making this much more complicated than it needs to be. We're trying to do something nice for you. No, I replied. You're trying to do something nice for yourselves. You want me to look different so that you can feel better about being seen with me. This isn't about my benefit. It's about your comfort. And what's wrong with that? She demanded. What's wrong with wanting your family to present well? Nothing, if everyone agrees to participate. Everything, if you're trying to force someone to change against their will. The makeover team retreated to their cars with various levels of disappointment and confusion. Derek seemed philosophical about the lost appointment, but Linda and Patricia appeared genuinely baffled by my refusal to accept their generous offer of improvement. Stephanie lingered after the others had left, her expression cycling through anger, frustration, and something that might have been genuine hurt. I don't understand you, she said finally. I'm trying to help you, and you act like I'm attacking you. Because you are attacking me, I replied. You're attacking my right to make choices about my own body and appearance. You're attacking my judgment, my taste, and my autonomy. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? She struggled for an answer that wouldn't sound selfish when spoken aloud. It's about being part of the family. It's about fitting in. Fitting in with whom? With your friends? With your social circle? With your idea of what a respectable family should look like? With normal people, Rose. With people who understand that appearance matters. I looked at this woman who had married my son, who was raising my grandchildren, who believed so fervently that external appearance was more important than personal authenticity, and I realized that we would never understand each other. Stephanie, I said gently, I think we have very different ideas about what matters in life. Obviously, she replied, her voice cold with disappointment. After she left, I sat on my porch swing and thought about the morning's events. An entire team of people had assembled to address the problem of my appearance, as if I were a crisis that required immediate intervention. The audacity was almost impressive in its scope, but more than audacity, it revealed the depth of their conviction, that they knew better than I did about how I should live my life. They genuinely believed that their preferences were superior to mine, that their aesthetic judgment was more valid than my personal comfort. That afternoon, I called my attorney to schedule another appointment. It was time to make some additional modifications to my will, additions that would make my feelings about respect and autonomy absolutely clear. Margaret Thornfield received me in her office with the same professional warmth she'd shown during our previous meetings. She listened carefully as I described the escalating attempts to control my appearance and behavior. So you want to add specific language about these incidents? She asked. I want to add a character clause, I said. I want to make it clear that inheritance from my estate is contingent on treating me with basic respect and dignity while I'm alive. Margaret raised an eyebrow. That's unusual, but certainly doable. What specific behaviors would trigger the clause? I thought about the graduation party conversation, about the ambush makeover attempt, about the parade of strangers who'd been recruited to judge my appearance. Publicly criticizing my appearance or lifestyle choices, I said. Organizing interventions, or makeovers without my consent, recruiting others to pressure me about personal decisions, treating me like a charity case or a project that needs to be fixed. Margaret made careful notes. And the consequences? Complete forfeiture of inheritance. No second chances, no appeals, no exceptions. Mrs. Patterson, I have to ask, are you certain you want to take such a firm stance? Family relationships can be complicated, and people sometimes say things they don't mean when emotions are running high. I thought about the question seriously. Was I being too harsh? Was I letting temporary anger override decades of love and family connection? Then I remembered the look on Stephanie's face when she'd called me embarrassing. I remembered the casual cruelty in my grandson's voice when he'd agreed that I dressed old-fashioned. I remembered my son's assumption that my feelings mattered, less than his wife's social comfort. "I'm certain," I said. "If they can't treat me with respect while I'm alive, they don't deserve to benefit from my death." The updated will was completed within a week. The new character clause was detailed, specific, and legally ironclad. Anyone who violated its terms would be immediately and permanently disinherited, with their portion of the estate going to charitable organizations I'd selected. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction as I signed the updated document. For the first time in decades, I was using my power proactively rather than reactively. Instead of simply enduring disrespect and hoping it would improve, I was establishing clear consequences for unacceptable behavior. The will was witnessed, notarized, and filed with the same care as before. Margaret assured me that the character clause was enforceable and that my wishes would be carried out exactly as specified. As I left the law office that afternoon, I realized that I'd fundamentally changed my relationship with my family. I was no longer the endlessly patient grandmother who absorbed criticism and manipulation in silence. I was no longer the reliable bank account that could be counted on regardless of how I was treated. I was a woman with boundaries, with standards, and with the means to enforce both. The transformation felt revolutionary. The weeks following the failed makeover ambush brought an unexpected peace to my daily routine. It seemed that my firm rejection of their intervention had finally convinced my family that I was serious about maintaining my autonomy. The phone calls became less frequent, the surprise visits stopped entirely, and I began to hope that perhaps we had reached some kind of understanding. I should have known better. The quiet lasted exactly 3 weeks before Stephanie decided to try a different approach altogether. Instead of attacking my appearance directly, she began what I can only describe as a campaign of social warfare designed to isolate me from the broader community and force me into compliance through sheer embarrassment. It started with what seemed like innocent social planning. Stephanie called to invite me to lunch with her book club, a group of women who met monthly to discuss literature, and based on everything I'd observed, to engage in elaborate social positioning disguised as intellectual discourse. "I thought it would be wonderful for you to meet some new people," she said with that particular tone of voice that suggested she was doing me an enormous favor. "These are very accomplished women, Rose. Professors, doctors, business owners. I think you'd enjoy their conversation." The invitation felt suspicious, but I was curious enough about her motives to accept. We arranged to meet at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place where the menu prices weren't listed, and the servers spoke in reverent whispers about the chef's seasonal selections. I arrived wearing one of my favorite dresses, a soft blue cotton with tiny yellow flowers, paired with my comfortable walking shoes and the pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother. I felt appropriately dressed for lunch with a group of women I'd never met, though I suspected my definition of appropriate would differ significantly from theirs. Stephanie was already seated at a large round table with 5 other women when I arrived. They were all impeccably dressed in what I recognized as expensive casual wear, the kind of carefully curated outfits that were designed to look effortless while costing more than most people's monthly salaries. "Rose!" Stephanie stood to greet me with an enthusiasm that felt performative. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet my mother-in-law, Rose Patterson." The introductions that followed confirmed my suspicions about this gathering. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a cardiologist at the University Hospital. Professor Sandra Bennett, who taught art history at the local college. Margaret Chen, who owned a chain of boutique fitness studios. These were women accustomed to being the most accomplished people in any room, and they assessed me with the kind of polite interest typically reserved for specimens in a laboratory. "Rose, Stephanie has told us so much about you," said Dr. Walsh, with a smile that never reached her eyes. "She mentioned that you have some very unique perspectives on personal presentation." The phrasing was careful, diplomatic, and loaded with implication. Stephanie had clearly briefed them about my resistance to her makeover attempts, and they'd come prepared to address what they saw as my stubborn refusal to accept guidance. "I believe in being authentic," I replied simply. "Of course, Professor," Bennett said smoothly. "Authenticity is so important, though I think most of us find that authenticity can be expressed in many different ways, some more effective than others." The conversation continued in this vein throughout the meal, with each woman taking turns to share subtle observations about the importance of adapting one's presentation to different social contexts. They discussed the psychology of first impressions, the sociology of dress codes, and the economics of personal branding as if these were objective truths rather than subjective preferences. Margaret Chen, who had been quiet through most of the meal, finally addressed me directly as we waited. For dessert, "Rose, I hope you don't mind me asking, but I'm curious about your background. Stephanie mentioned that you've always been very practical in your approach to fashion." The word practical hung in the air like a polite synonym for something much less flattering. I could see where this was heading, and I realized that this entire lunch had been orchestrated as a gentle but persistent form of peer pressure. "I dress in a way that makes me comfortable and reflects my personality," I said. "I've never seen the point in spending large amounts of money on clothes that don't feel like me." "But don't you think," Dr. Walsh interjected, "that sometimes what feels comfortable to us might not be what's best for us? I mean, in medicine, we often have to encourage patients to make changes that feel uncomfortable initially, but lead to better outcomes." The comparison was insulting and revealing. These women saw my clothing choices as a medical condition requiring intervention, a problem to be solved through expert guidance and social pressure. "Are you suggesting that my appearance is a health issue?" I asked. "Not a health issue, exactly," Professor Bennett said carefully, "but perhaps a social issue. The way we present ourselves affects how others perceive us, which in turn affects our opportunities and relationships." "And you believe my opportunities and relationships are suffering because of how I dress?" The women exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to proceed without openly insulting me. Stephanie jumped in to smooth over the awkwardness. "Rose, no. One is saying there's anything wrong with you personally. We're just suggesting that small changes in presentation could enhance your already wonderful qualities." "Like what kinds of changes?" Margaret Chen, emboldened by what she perceived as an opening, leaned forward enthusiastically. "Well, for instance, colors that complement your skin tone better, silhouettes that are more flattering to your figure, accessories that add sophistication without being overwhelming." "And who decides what's flattering? Who determines what's sophisticated?" "Well," Dr. Walsh said with the confidence of someone accustomed to being recognized as an authority, "there are established principles of style and design. These aren't arbitrary opinions. They're based on research about what creates positive visual impact." I looked around the table at these accomplished, intelligent women who had somehow convinced themselves that their aesthetic preferences were scientific facts. They genuinely believed that their way of dressing was objectively superior to mine, that their values were universal truths rather than personal choices. "I see," I said finally. "And if I chose not to follow these established principles, what would be the consequences?" The question seemed to confuse them. They'd come prepared to convince me of the benefits of changing, not to consider the implications of my refusal to change. "Well," Stephanie said hesitantly, "I suppose you'd continue, tried to miss out on opportunities to make better impressions." "What kinds of opportunities?" "Social opportunities," Professor Bennett suggested. "Professional connections, the chance to be taken more seriously in various contexts." "I'm 71 years old and retired," I pointed out. "What professional connections do I need? What social opportunities am I missing that I actually want?" The women looked genuinely puzzled by this question. The possibility that I might not want their version of social success, that I might be content with my current life and relationships, seemed to be outside their comprehension. "But don't you want to feel beautiful?" Margaret Chen asked, her voice carrying what I'm sure she thought was compassionate concern. "I do feel beautiful," I replied. "That's the part you don't seem to understand. I'm not suffering from low self-esteem or lack of confidence. I'm not crying myself to sleep because I don't look like you. I'm perfectly happy with who I am and how I look." The silence that followed was profound. These women had built their entire intervention around the assumption that I must be unhappy with my appearance, that I must want to change but simply didn't know how. The possibility that I was genuinely content with my choices had never occurred to them. Dr. Walsh made one final attempt. "Rose, I think maybe you're not seeing yourself objectively. Sometimes we become so accustomed to our habits that we don't realize how they might be limiting us." "And I think," I replied, standing up and placing my napkin on the table, "that you're not seeing me objectively. You're so convinced that your way of living is the only valid way that you can't imagine. Someone making different choices for good reasons." I thanked them for lunch, kissed Stephanie goodbye, and left them sitting at their table, probably dissecting my behavior and confirming to each other that I was indeed a lost cause who refused to accept help. The lunch incident marked a turning point in my relationship with Stephanie and, by extension, with the rest of my family. Having failed to change me through direct pressure, family intervention, and peer influence, she began a more subtle but far more damaging campaign designed to make me question my judgment and my place in the family structure. She started excluding me from family events, always with reasonable explanations. The dinner party she was hosting was going to be very small and intimate. The birthday celebration was really more for the younger generation. The holiday gathering was going to be casual, and she thought I might be more comfortable staying home. When I was included in events, I noticed that I was being managed rather than welcomed. Stephanie would position me in photographs to minimize my visibility, steer conversations away from topics where I might have opinions, and generally treat me like a slightly embarrassing relative who needed to be contained rather than celebrated. The children began to pick up on these dynamics. Tommy, home from college for winter break, was polite but distant, as if he'd been coached on how to interact with me in ways that wouldn't upset his mother. Jake became increasingly transactional in his communications, texting only when he needed something and ending conversations quickly once his needs were met. Only Emma remained unchanged, continuing to visit me regularly and share her thoughts and experiences with the same openness she'd always shown. But even she seemed more cautious, more aware that her relationship with me was somehow problematic within the family dynamic. "Grandma Rose," she said during one of our afternoon visits, "why is Mom so upset about how you dress?" It was a question I'd been expecting, and I'd given considerable thought to how I would answer it when it came. "I think your mother believes that how people dress reflects on their character and their place in society," I said carefully. "She thinks that if I dressed differently, people would think better of me and of our family." Emma considered this for a moment. "But don't people think well of you already? I mean, all my friends think you're really nice. My teachers always say good things about you when they see you at school events." "Your mother and I have different ideas about what's important in life," I explained. "She values making a certain kind of impression. I value being authentic to who I am." Which one is right? It was such a direct question, so innocent and yet so complex. "I think they're both right for the people who hold those values," I said. "The problem comes when someone tries to force their values on someone else." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Mom does that sometimes. She wants everyone to want the same thing she wants." The wisdom of this 15-year-old continued to amaze me. She had identified the core issue with more clarity than any of the adults in her family. "What do you want, Emma?" I asked. "What kinds of things are important to you?" "I want to be a good person," she said simply. "I want to be kind and honest and helpful. I want to do work that matters and have relationships with people who care about me for who I really am. Those sound like excellent goals to me. Mom wants me to care more about clothes and makeup and having the right kind of friends. She wants me to be more like Madison and her sister. And how do you feel about that? Emma shrugged. I guess I feel like there are already plenty of people like Madison in the world. Maybe there's room for people like me, too. I wanted to hug this remarkable young woman who had somehow managed to maintain her sense of self, despite growing up in a household that prioritized appearance over authenticity. She gave me hope that the next generation might be wiser than mine. But Emma's wisdom also highlighted the extent to which the rest of my family had lost their way. They'd become so focused on external validation that they'd forgotten the value of internal satisfaction. They'd chosen performance over authenticity, image over substance. The final confrontation came in early spring, almost a year after Tommy's graduation party had started this entire conflict. Stephanie had apparently decided that subtle social pressure wasn't working and that it was time for a more direct approach. She called to request a family meeting, her voice carrying the kind of formal authority typically reserved for serious business discussions. Rose, we need to talk. All of us together. There are some things that need to be said, and I think it's time we were all honest about this situation. I agreed to the meeting, curious to see what new strategy she had developed. We gathered at Marcus and Stephanie's house on a Sunday afternoon, with all 3 grandchildren present as well as both parents. Stephanie had clearly prepared for this conversation. She had notes, she had talking points, and she had the determined expression of someone who intended to resolve this conflict once and for all. Rose, she began, I want you to know that this conversation is coming from a place of love and concern. We're all worried about you, and we think it's time to address some difficult truths. I settled back in my chair, curious to hear what truths she intended to address. The fact is, she continued, your refusal to accept any guidance about your appearance is starting to affect the whole family. The children are embarrassed to bring friends around when you're here. Marcus is tired of making excuses for your appearance at work events. I'm exhausted from trying to manage the social awkwardness you create wherever we go. She paused, looking around the room for support. Marcus nodded encouragingly. Tommy and Jake stared at their hands, clearly uncomfortable, but unwilling to contradict their mother. Only Emma met my eyes directly, her expression sympathetic. We've tried being patient, Stephanie continued. We've tried being helpful. We've tried being understanding. But your stubbornness is affecting all of us, and we can't continue to enable this behavior. The word enable was particularly interesting. In Stephanie's worldview, my family's acceptance of my appearance choices was enabling destructive behavior that needed to be corrected. So what exactly are you proposing? I asked. We're proposing an ultimatum, Marcus said, finally speaking up. Either you accept help with updating your appearance, or we're going to have to limit your involvement in family activities. The threat was delivered with the kind of careful formality that suggested it had been rehearsed. This wasn't an emotional outburst. This was a calculated strategy designed to force my compliance through the threat of social isolation. I see, I said calmly. And what would this limited involvement look like? No more public events, Stephanie said. No more family gatherings where other people might see you. No more school activities with the children. Basically, you'd be welcome in our homes for private visits, but not for anything that involves our social circles. I looked around the room at my family, these people I had loved and supported and sacrificed for, who were now threatening to banish me from their lives unless I submitted to their aesthetic judgment. And you all agree with this ultimatum? I asked. Marcus nodded firmly. Mom, we've been patient, but this has gone on long enough. It's time for you to be reasonable. Tommy and Jake nodded reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to oppose their parents. Emma, however, spoke up. I don't agree with it, she said quietly. I think Grandma should get to dress however she wants. Stephanie turned to her daughter with a sharp expression. Emma, you're too young to understand the complexities of this situation. I understand that you're trying to force Grandma to change who she is because you're embarrassed by her, Emma replied with surprising firmness. And I think that's wrong. That's enough, Marcus said sternly. Emma, this is an adult conversation. Then maybe the adults should start acting like adults, Emma shot back. The room fell silent. This 15-year-old had just pointed out what the rest of us had been dancing around, that the adults in the room were behaving like children, ganging up on someone who was different from them instead of accepting and celebrating that difference. I stood up slowly, looking at each member of my family in turn. These people who had just threatened to exile me from their lives unless I complied with their demands. These people who valued social conformity more than family loyalty. I want to make sure I understand this correctly, I said. You're telling me that unless I change my appearance to meet your standards, I won't be welcome at family events. Is that accurate? We're telling you that actions have consequences, Stephanie said, and your refusal to make reasonable accommodations has consequences for all of us. I see. And you believe this ultimatum will motivate me to comply with your demands? We hope it will help you understand how serious this situation has become, Marcus said. I nodded thoughtfully. Well, then I think it's time I shared some information that might help you understand how serious this situation has become from my perspective. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder containing copies of my updated will and the character clause my attorney had drafted. I handed a copy to Marcus and another to Stephanie. What is this? Stephanie asked, scanning. The document. That's my last will and testament, I said calmly. Specifically, it's the section that outlines the character requirements for inheritance from my estate. Marcus's face went pale as he read through the document. Mom, what is this? What estate? I suppose I should have mentioned this sooner, I said, settling back into my chair. I'm not the struggling widow you seem to think I am. Thanks to some wise investments and a generous bequest from my former employer, I'm worth approximately $12 million. The silence in the room was absolute. Stephanie's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Tommy and Jake stared at me as if I'd revealed that I was secretly a space alien. 12 million? Marcus whispered. Give or take, I confirmed. According to my previous will, that money was to be divided among my grandchildren, with smaller bequests for you and Stephanie. Tommy, Jake, and Emma were each going to inherit approximately $3 million. Were? Stephanie's voice was barely audible. Were. Past tense. Because according to the character clause you're now reading, anyone who publicly criticizes my appearance, organizes interventions without my consent, or attempts to pressure me into changing my personal choices is immediately and permanently disinherited. I watched as the implications of this information sank in around the room. Marcus was frantically reading through the legal document, his face growing more ashen with each paragraph. Stephanie had collapsed into a chair, the paper trembling in her hands. The graduation party conversation would have been enough to trigger the clause, I continued conversationally. The makeover ambush certainly qualified, and this ultimatum you've just delivered has sealed the deal quite thoroughly. Mom, Marcus said desperately, you can't be serious about this. I'm absolutely serious. My attorney has assured me that the character clause is legally binding and entirely enforceable. But we were trying to help you, Stephanie protested, tears beginning to form in her eyes. You were trying to control me, I corrected. There's a significant difference. Tommy finally found his voice. Grandma, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I never meant. I know you didn't, sweetheart. But that's the point. You all became so focused on what you thought was wrong with me that you forgot to consider whether anything was actually wrong at all. Jake was staring at the document as if it might spontaneously combust. So we're not getting anything? You're getting exactly what you've earned through your behavior, I said. Nothing. But that's not fair, he protested. We didn't know about the money. If we'd known. If you'd known I was wealthy, you would have treated me with more respect? Is that what you're saying? Jake opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again as he realized the trap he'd walked into. That's exactly the problem, I continued. You should have treated me with respect because I'm your grandmother, because I love you, because I've devoted my life to your welfare. The amount of money I have shouldn't affect how you treat me. Emma, who had been quietly absorbing this revelation, finally spoke up. Grandma, does this mean I'm disinherited too? I looked at this remarkable young woman who had stood up for me when the rest of her family had turned against me. No, sweetheart. You're the only one who consistently treated me with kindness and respect. Your inheritance is intact. The relief on her face was quickly replaced by concern. But what about college? What about Tommy and Jake's college? Tommy and Jake will figure out their college finances the same way most young people do, through scholarships, loans, and their own hard work. It might be good for them to learn the value of earning something instead of having it handed to them. Mom, Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. Please, let's talk about this. Let's find a way to work this out. There's nothing to work out, I replied. The character clause is already in effect. Your names have already been removed from the will. Can't you change it back? I could, theoretically. But why would I? You've just threatened to banish me from family events unless I submit to your control. You've made it clear that your social comfort is more important than my autonomy. What exactly has changed that would make me want to reward that behavior? Stephanie had been crying quietly, but now she looked up with desperate eyes. Rose, I'm sorry. I see now that I was wrong. I was trying to help, but I understand now that I was being controlling instead. Do you understand that, Stephanie? Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear now that you know there's money involved? She had no answer for that question. Here's what's going to happen, I said, standing up and gathering my things. I'm going to continue living my life exactly as I choose, wearing exactly what I want to wear, and making exactly the decisions that feel right to me. You're welcome to be part of that life if you can treat me with the respect and dignity that every human being deserves. And if we can't? Marcus asked quietly. Then you'll discover that ultimatums work both ways. You've threatened to exclude me from your lives unless I comply with your demands. I'm threatening to exclude you from my life unless you can treat me with basic human decency. I walked toward the door, then turned back for one final observation. You know what's ironic about this whole situation? You've spent months trying to change my appearance because you thought it reflected poorly on you. But your behavior throughout this conflict has revealed your true character far more clearly than my clothing ever could. I left them sitting in their living room, surrounded by the wreckage of their assumptions and expectations. As I drove home, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The weight of their disapproval, their manipulation, their constant pressure to be someone I wasn't, had finally been lifted from my shoulders. Over the following weeks, I received numerous calls and visits from family members attempting to apologize, to negotiate, to find some way to restore their inheritance. Marcus came by regularly, sometimes angry, sometimes pleading, always desperate to find a way to undo the consequences of his choices. Stephanie wrote long letters explaining her behavior, promising to change, swearing that she finally understood the error of her ways. Tommy and Jake both called frequently, their conversations a mixture of genuine regret and transparent attempts at manipulation. But Emma simply continued visiting me as she always had, bringing her homework and her stories, and her wonderful perspectives on life. She never mentioned the inheritance, never pressured me to reconsider my decisions, never treated me any differently than she had before learning about my wealth. "Grandma," she said one afternoon as we worked together in my garden, "are you happy with how everything turned out?" I considered the question carefully. Was I happy that my family had revealed themselves to be shallow and controlling? Was I happy that my son had chosen his wife's social comfort over his mother's dignity? Was I happy that my grandchildren had learned to value money more than relationships? "I'm happy that the truth finally came out," I said. "I'm happy that I finally stood up for myself. I'm happy that I don't have to pretend anymore that their behavior was acceptable. Do you think they'll ever really change?" "I don't know, sweetheart. But it doesn't matter. I've changed, and that's what I can control." 6 months later, I received a call from Margaret Thornfield informing me that Marcus had hired an attorney to contest the character clause in my will. The legal challenge was quickly dismissed, as Margaret had anticipated. The clause was perfectly legal, clearly written, and thoroughly documented. A year later, Emma graduated from high school as valedictorian of her class. I attended the ceremony wearing my favorite floral dress and my comfortable shoes, and I was the proudest grandmother in the auditorium. Afterward, we celebrated with dinner at her favorite restaurant, just the two of us, talking about her plans for college and her dreams for the future. The rest of the family was notably absent from our celebration. 2 years later, I moved to a smaller house closer to Emma's university, where she visited me regularly and brought her new friends to meet her eccentric grandmother, who dressed exactly as she pleased and lived exactly as she chose. I donated the majority of my estate to charities focused on women's autonomy and self-determination, keeping enough to ensure Emma's education and future security. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that had tried to control me would ultimately receive nothing, while the organizations working to free other women from similar control would benefit substantially. I never regretted my decision. Every morning when I dressed in my comfortable clothes and looked in the mirror at my authentic self, I felt grateful for the strength I'd finally found to choose my own happiness over their approval. Sometimes, people ask me if I miss my family, if I wish things had turned out differently. The answer is complicated. I miss the family I thought I had, the people I believed loved me unconditionally. But I don't miss the family I actually had, the people who tried to reshape me into their preferred version of a grandmother. I learned something important during those difficult months. Love without respect isn't really love at all. It's ownership, control, possession disguised as affection. Real love accepts people as they are, celebrates their authentic selves, and never demands that they sacrifice their identity for someone else's comfort. I'm 73 now, still wearing my floral dresses, still tending my garden, still living, exactly as I choose. Emma visits regularly with her boyfriend, a young man who treats me with the same respect and warmth that she does. We talk about books and politics and life, and they value my opinions not because I dress expensively, but because I've lived long enough to have learned a few things about what really matters. The money that was supposed to give my family security and freedom ultimately gave me something far more valuable, the power to demand the respect I deserved and the strength to walk away when it wasn't offered. That turned out to be worth more than $12 million. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.